All right, guys, let's get into this story. This is a really crazy story, and I can't even believe the outcome. What's up, you guys? Back with another video. This one is going to be the case on Mark Sievers. Now, if that name sounds familiar to you, and you know anything about the Wade Wilson case, you might have heard some of the phone calls where Wade Wilson talks about how he's basically in the same like cell block as Mark Sievers. He actually like says something to the effect of he's like on the same block as like the guy who killed his doctor or wife or something of that sort. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown of this case. Then we will get into just this court TV segment because it's 44 minutes. And you guys know the drill. I will link all the things that I can link, body cam, interrogation, trial, verdict, and sentencing in the description box. So on June 28th of 2015, 46-year-old Teresa Sievers was murdered at her home in Bonita Springs, Florida. 2 men bludgeoned her to death with a hammer, striking her 17 times. Police arrested Curtis Wainwright Jr. and Jimmy Ray Rogers, both from Missouri, for the crime in December 2015. Arrested and accused of masterminding the murder. The motive was life insurance money and the fear that Teresa would take their children away. All 3 men were found guilty. Wright received a 25-year sentence. Rogers was sentenced to life in prison, and Mark Sievers was sentenced to death. Now, I do believe that Mark Sievers is at Raiford Prison. We will have to look into that. Let's see. Teresa was a doctor. They had 2 children together. And let's go ahead and get into this.
911, what is your emergency?
I'm at a friend's house. He's out of town, and I came here to check on his wife, and she's dead on the floor.
Okay.
The address is...
Okay, stay on the line. Sir, hold on, stay on the line. Tell me exactly what happened.
My friend, Teresa Sievers, she's a doctor. I'm a doctor. Husband is in Connecticut, and her husband called me to say she didn't show up at work, and she's not answering her phone. And I was on my way into work, so I swung by, and she's dead on the floor. And there's a hammer at the side, and she's bashed in the back of the head. She's cold. I mean, somebody killed her. You know, I can't see her falling or anything like that. I just looked and I thought, my God, you know, she's my friend.
Bonita Springs, a mostly quiet beach community in southwest Florida, less than 30 miles from the larger city of Fort Myers. Mostly quiet, that is, until the night of June 28th, 2015. That was the night a well-known community figure, Dr. Teresa Sievers, was found dead on the floor of her kitchen, bludgeoned to death, 17 wounds from what appeared to be a hammer. Was it a burglary gone bad? Or did Mark Sievers enlist a little help from his friends to do something far more sinister?
Shock and terror tonight in this normally quiet Bonita Springs neighborhood. Crime scene investigators surrounded this house, which neighbors say is home to a family of 4.
Initially, upon receiving the call, I was sitting in the office, and we received limited information, basically, that there was the deceased remains of what appeared to be a female and that it appeared to be a homicide. As I walked into the kitchen, immediately to my left by the refrigerator, I could see the obviously deceased remains of Dr. Teresa Sievers. This scene was unique in nature because of the gruesomeness of the offense. She seemed to have sustained significant blunt force trauma to the back of the head.
Our partners at News Press spoke with the victim's sister yesterday. She says Sievers was in Connecticut with her husband and 2 daughters for a family gathering and flew back alone Sunday night.
To have a murder in Bonita, I mean, this is, when you talk about the little picture-perfect neighborhood, beautiful area with very, very little happening. It just is completely out of the ordinary. Can it never happen? Things happen everywhere, but in our county, in this place, it's the unthinkable.
It did not feel like a burglary. There was evidence that it may have been a burglary. That's not something that you would write off, but from the scenes that I've seen in the past and in my experience in death investigations, I did have some suspicion that the scene may have been staged. It didn't feel right.
A lot of people don't know what the blue zones are. The blue zones are 5 areas in the world where people are living well into their hundreds.
She was this dynamo of a person who was not quite 5 feet tall, but who owned a room when she walked in. She always had a smile on her face. She always had a solution. She always had something to offer.
Lupus is an autoimmune illness.
To her patients, she was the only person who ever made them feel better or feel like there was hope that they would someday feel better.
You know, I really never noticed anything strange about Mr. Sievers at all. He was always out with the girls. I know there was one particular time that I stopped and bought lemonade, and he was kind of hurrying them up to fold up shop because they were going to be late for church.
Court will come to order, all rise.
For the record, both assistant state attorneys are present. Mr. Sievers is present, and both defense counsel. State's ready.
Yes, sir.
Defense is ready.
Yes, sir.
On June 29th, 2015, Teresa Sievers is found on her kitchen floor, dead. And the evidence will establish that Mark Sievers, her husband, arranged for this murder and agreed to pay money for this murder out of the life insurance policies that would become due upon her death.
Mark Sievers' wife is dead, and he wants to know why. Ultimately, it is our position that Teresa Sievers was worth more alive than dead. It is our position Mark Sievers did not conspire to murder his wife, and Mark Sievers did not murder his wife. And at the end of this trial, I'm going to be asking each and every one of you to return a verdict of not guilty because Mr. Sievers is innocent. Thank you.
When this case came into the office initially, I had no inkling that it would end up where it did, that it would go where it went. I knew that Lee County Sheriff's Office would do a thorough investigation, but what it took to actually solve this case, the amount of information that had to be collected, we had never seen anything like this in our office before. You could describe what the members of the jury are seeing and from where the photo was taken, the perspective and angle.
This photograph shows the victim, Dr. Teresa Sievers, on the kitchen floor.
He has never told his defense team anything other than that he loved his wife. So there were certain times when there was either the discussion of her murder in details or photographs, he would become very emotional.
Initially, when we first started the case, we probably had 5,900 pages and ended up with over 90,000 pages and gigabytes worth of data.
Was her head shaved?
Yes, we had to, yes.
Is that standard procedure in every autopsy?
Not every autopsy, but in
This is the same medical examiner. I think it's a medical examiner that was in the Wade Wilson case. So he must just be Lee County's ME. It's crazy.
Autopsy is where you have injuries to the scalp. It allows us to visualize the actual injury. In this case, there were many injuries that were underneath the hair, so we had to remove that hair in order to better characterize those injuries.
The day I attended the autopsy of Dr. Sievers, it was apparent to me that there was a large amount of overkill. And to be very clear, what I'm trying to say is she was hit so many times. There was so much damage to her body. It said to me that someone either enjoyed themselves or this was a possible crime of passion where someone knew someone.
Okay, and repeat that one more time.
He gave me the key code to get into the garage door, and I just walked in the door and she was dead on the floor.
Did you tell him at that point that Dr. Sievers was deceased?
No, I did not. I told him that something terrible had happened.
This brutal, premeditated crime, cold and calculated according to the prosecution, was beginning to draw international attention. Stories began to weave the details of a beautiful doctor wife with a stay-at-home husband and 2 young girls, masking a troubled marriage. All the while, the investigation was going nowhere. But then a get-together in Missouri would yield a tip that changed everything.
Hey, Mark. This is Officer Mark. I'm just calling to check on you, see how you're doing. Teresa comes back tonight, and then the girls and I will be back on Wednesday night. Just wanted to say hello and see how you're doing. Take care, Mark.
Was that something that Mr. Sievers frequently did? Did he frequently call to check on you and see how you were doing?
No, we didn't have that kind of relationship.
So how would you describe the fact that he called and left you this message the night before checking on you? How would you describe that?
It was very odd, just very strange.
And the morning of June 29th, did you happen to receive any contact from Mark Sievers?
Yes, I did.
Hey, Mark. This is Mark. I called yesterday just to check on you. Now I'm calling you today to see if you can check on Teresa.
It was a voicemail from Mark, Mr. Sievers, asking me to go to the house and check on his wife.
Teresa's not at work yet, and the office is calling and texting, and we can't get through to Teresa. So I just thought maybe if you could possibly swing by the house, and the garage code is 1313, enter, and then the door opens up.
I started to walk towards the entryway from the garage into the house, and one of the dogs, they had 2 dogs, and one of the dogs ran out into the driveway. As I was walking into the house, I was calling her name. There was no answer. After I took a couple of steps into the house, it was obvious where she was. She was dead on the floor in the kitchen.
I know that you're a doctor, but can you tell me how you were able to figure out at that point that Dr. Sievers was dead?
Well, there was a lot of blood on the floor in the kitchen, a big puddle around her body, and she had this massive head wound in the back of her head, and she was cold and lifeless. I yelled into the house. I did not know if their daughters were at home with her. There was no response, and so I left the house to call 911.
The lights were on. I could see her purses on the countertop, and she didn't answer. I pounded, and he gave me the key code to get into the garage door. I opened the garage door, and the door leading to it was open, and I walked in the door, and she was dead on the floor.
After I got off the phone with 911, I called Mr. Sievers to talk to him further about what had happened.
Did you tell him at that point that Dr. Sievers was deceased?
No, I did not. I told him that something terrible had happened and that she was hurt.
Did he ask how his wife was hurt?
He didn't ask specifically, but he asked, was it a robbery?
Mark Sievers' behavior was unusual. A reasonable husband would say, what happened? Mr. Sievers did nothing reasonable that day. He didn't ask if she was going to the hospital or what hospital she was going to.
So knowing that the paramedics were there?
That told me he knew she was dead. And that's what I wanted Dr. Petrides' testimony to convey to the jury.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Initially, when Dr. Sievers was found on the 29th of June 2015, did you have any suspects at that time?
No.
At some point, was there a break in the case?
Our largest break occurred, saying July 9th, same year. We received a phone call from someone up north saying that they knew of a witness that had information that could impact our investigation. Her name is Rose Gruner.
Rose spent a lot of time with this person we would later learn to be Kathy Moran. And she overheard Kathy speaking to her daughter, who we would later learn to be Angela Wright. And Angela was very upset that her new husband had left abruptly for a trip to Florida and had oddly left his cell phone home. We start looking into who does, the husband, Mark Sievers, talk to? Who talks to him? And you see that frequent activity of Curtis Wainwright. And now you compare that to the information that you get from Rose Gruner, and we find out that this guy who took a last-minute trip to Florida conveniently on the weekend Teresa Sievers was murdered happens to be the best friend of Teresa Sievers' husband.
Wainwright and Mark Sievers were childhood friends. Wainwright and Mark Sievers look like twin brothers if you put them next to each other. They called each other brother on their Facebook page. And so it started to look like there was a plot.
Did you get to ask him about the death of Dr. Sievers?
Yes, we did. He denied all involvement.
Based on the information that Rose was able to give us and the information that we were able to confirm, we had enough to obtain a search warrant for Curtis Wainwright's residence, later his vehicle, and Mark Sievers' condo.
And what was the reason for throwing these out the window?
I didn't know at the time.
But you came to learn why, right?
Yes, because he murdered somebody.
All it took was a tip from a woman named Rose, and the investigation went from cold to blazing hot. 2 detectives from the Lee County Sheriff's Office in Florida would stay on the road for almost 2 weeks, far longer than either of them expected. And what they would find in Missouri would bring not 1 or 2, but 3 suspects into sharp focus. Curtis Wainwright Jr., his friend Jimmy Ray Rogers, and ultimately, Wright's best friend from high school, Mark Sievers.
Jimmy's always talking about how he used to be a hitman, and when I talked to him about it, I told him that I might know a way that he could make some money if he was interested, and he said he definitely was.
Did you, during the time you were out in Missouri, have an occasion to speak to a person called Jimmy Ray Rogers?
Yes, I did.
And what was your purpose in speaking with Jimmy Ray Rogers?
Being that Curtis Wainwright became a person of interest in the investigation, based on what we were doing, we were trying to get as much background as possible on him. In doing that, Jimmy Ray Rogers' name came up, so we went to go speak with him to see if we could obtain any further information.
And was Mr. Rogers a suspect at this time at all?
No. Through the process of going through evidence from Mr. Wright, namely his cell phone, we learned that Jimmy Ray Rogers was someone that he spoke with and in a close time to the weekend when Dr. Teresa Sievers was murdered. So that became something of interest to us during our timeline.
And I guess, how did he act?
Jimmy seemed upset, kind of frantic. Can you start from the beginning and let me know everything that happened and about how you learned about what happened leading up to us talking today?
Like after you guys came, I asked him if he went to Florida, and he told me yeah. And then I asked him what he went down there for, and he said to make money.
And how much money was he supposed to get for this?
Close to $10,000.
Taylor Showmaker was at that time the live-in girlfriend of Jimmy Rogers, one of our primary suspects in the Teresa Sievers investigation. At a point in the investigation, we had information that led to a search warrant on Jimmy Ray Rogers' residence.
I want to move a few weeks forward to July 18th. So the detectives have left, and what did Mr. Rogers say or do?
I don't think he spoke to him very long. I think he pretty much shut him down. They left a business card on the counter, and he grabbed that card and got rid of it. I never seen it again.
Did he also take anything to the dumpster to throw out?
Yes, the shoes.
And were those the shoes that had been in the cooler when he got home?
Yes.
What happened after that?
He got his phone out of a locker and put it in a drinking fountain and then stomped it and smashed it.
Did you end up having a conversation with Miss Taylor? Did she end up speaking to you about potential evidence that you might be able to locate?
Yes. She did point out 4 specific items and later took me to another location where I recovered further evidence.
How did we come to find these items today?
Because I threw them out the window.
And what was the reason for throwing these out the window?
I didn't know at the time.
But you came to learn why, right?
Yes.
Okay, and why is that?
Because he murdered somebody.
Did you and Mr. Rogers have a conversation when you were both in bed?
Yes. I brought up the conversation. I was the one that pretty much told him I knew that he had something to do with the murder. He said they killed her with a hammer.
Did Jimmy have a nickname for himself?
Yeah, Jimmy the Hammer.
As of June 12th, that Curtis Wright was a person of interest. Is that correct?
Yes.
In fact, he was a suspect then.
Yes. We transported him from Missouri back to Lee County.
And during that trip back, did Mr. Wright say anything to you about this case at all?
No.
Okay, bring him out.
I literally thought that they were twins. When they first showed that picture of that wedding, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize he was a twin. They're not twins. Also, I know I probably say this in every single video. I always would love to get my hands on a defendant's notepad. What are they writing? What do you guys think they're writing? He looks really angry.
Anytime you use somebody who has been involved in a crime, as Curtis Wainwright had been involved, he had 5 felony convictions, I think it is absolutely critical that a jury realize that their verdict doesn't rely on that person, that their verdict is set and solid in evidence that's compelling before they ever heard him testify.
You have never taken a polygraph about this case, have you?
I offered to.
That wasn't what I asked. You have never taken a polygraph in this case, have you?
I feel like this is Battle of the Bald Heads. Battle of the Bald Heads.
Wasn't asked to.
That wasn't what I asked.
Curtis Wainwright Jr., a 5-time convicted felon who lied repeatedly to law enforcement in early interviews, was now the key suspect in the death of Teresa Sievers. And before long, Wright would not only be the key suspect, he'd also become the prosecution's star witness. But could they convince a jury to believe an ex-con who was also Mark Siever's best friend, that his story of a murder for hire was actually the truth?
Mr. Wright, who killed Dr. Teresa Sievers?
Jimmy Rogers and I physically did it, but Mark Sievers was also involved in the planning.
Why did you do it?
I was asked to do it.
By whom?
Mr. Sievers.
I guess it really started about 6 months before. He brought it up in a way that somebody that he knew was having a problem and asked me if I knew anybody that might be interested. Like just having somebody beat up or something like that is, at least that's what my impression of it was.
You're under arrest right now.
Yes, for the murder of Dr. Sievers. I entered a plea agreement to cooperate.
Mr. Wright's lawyer reached out to us and said that he had some information that could potentially help the investigation. And so the impetus for us was to get additional information that could potentially help our prosecutions of all three men. Certainly the impetus for Mr. Wright, with the advice of his attorneys, was to negotiate a better sentence for him.
Did law enforcement officers come to Missouri?
They did.
Did they ask you about if you had any involvement in the Teresa Sievers death?
Yes.
Did you tell them the truth?
No.
Why did you lie?
To protect me, Mark, and Jimmy. I tried to throw the detectives off our track. Was the reason that I told them what I did.
I want to ask you some questions that may be upsetting, but I don't want to upset you because this is all part of me trying to do an investigation. Do you have any reason to believe that Teresa was engaged in a relationship with anyone else?
No.
Do you have any reason to believe that Teresa was engaging in any kind of sexual activity with anyone else?
No. Mr. Sievers indicated that he wanted to talk to you about something?
Yes. He told me that he and Teresa were having marital problems. He told me that she was having an affair and that they were having financial problems as well, considering bankruptcy, that she was leaving him, that he couldn't let her take the kids away from him. And he said that they were in danger, some kind of danger, without him there to be able to protect them. He told me that really the only option that he had was for her to die. And he said that he needed to have her killed. I had asked him about, if this was going to happen, what kind of money would be available. He had told me that they had a lot of insurance on her. A lot is what he said. He didn't tell me any amounts, but he said that him and the kids would be well taken care of. When the trip got planned, that eliminated the issue with him and the girls being in any danger. He told me that that's when he wanted it done, either Sunday when she got home or Monday or Tuesday when she left work, as long as it was done before he got back.
There was 40 or 50 grand in the house, and weapons, and computers, and other valuable items that belonged to the Sievers family. The fact that those valuables weren't taken from the house was also a key point in the investigation because it tended to negate any suspicion that this was a burglary. The only thing he wanted to steal was Dr. Sievers' life.
Have you decided now how she was going to die?
No, not at that point. We hadn't. There was a few different ideas. Initially, I would have liked to have seen it be more looked like an accident. Mark's suggestion was that she walked in on a robbery. She got home probably 25 minutes before we were expecting her.
And when she entered the house, what did you do?
I panicked. I jumped up and I followed her into the house.
When you followed her into the house, did you pick up anything?
I did.
What did you pick up?
There was a hammer, among other things, laying on. There's a little chest freezer sitting right to the right side of the door going into the house. So it was right there.
Did you become aware up to this point that Dr. Sievers was aware of your presence?
At that point that I caught up to her, she was right at the countertop. But right before that, there's a dog dish. It's on a stand because the dogs are older dogs, and it's in that little hallway. I tripped over, I hit that thing with my foot.
Did it make a sound?
I kicked that stand. The dog dish went flying, water went everywhere. She jumped and started to turn towards me.
When she started to turn towards you, what did you do?
I hit her. I hit her with the hammer. She was turning to the right to face me, and so it would have been not necessarily the back of the head, but kind of the side, upper side. She put her hands up and was trying to defend herself.
She fought?
Yes.
She fought for her life?
Yeah, she was surprised. I actually think that she thought I was Mark. She said why. It was just too much. I mean, she would have been dead no matter what happened. It's what we were hired to do, but not like that. Even a walked-in robbery wouldn't be that brutal.
I wanted the jury confident when they heard Curtis Wainwright that he was simply providing a background for what had happened.
You have never taken a polygraph about this case, have you?
I offered to.
That wasn't what I asked. You have never taken a polygraph in this case, have you?
Wasn't asked to.
That wasn't what I asked.
To get into the minds of a juror and a jury and to try to unweave and unravel and figure out why the various members believe or discredit certain witnesses. All we would have to do is be just speculating.
You told Detective Levitt I did not help Mark kill his wife. Do you recall telling Detective Levitt that?
Yes.
And then after the murder, you came down again for the funeral, is that correct?
Yes.
Having the mission completed, right?
Yes.
Did you ever get $50,000 in cash at that time?
No, our agreement was it would be paid after he got his life insurance payment.
Mr. Wright and Mr. Sievers were longtime best friends, and perhaps they felt if this gentleman was willing to rat out or give up his best friend, then there was some credibility to that.
The cell phones from Jimmy Ray Rogers was very useful because it connected to the GPS in the car at some point.
She was our strength, our inspiration, and we will miss her every day for the rest of our lives.
So law enforcement had a suspect, in fact, two, but they still needed Curtis Wainwright Jr.'s story to match the evidence. And this is where a murder for hire would become a 21st century technology thriller. Cell phones, burner phones, a Garmin GPS, over 90,000 documents, all evidence that would make this case the largest ever handled by the Lee County Sheriff's Office and the state attorney. What the data would ultimately reveal would be a roadmap that would lead to a trio of killers.
Hopefully we can talk privately tomorrow. Nothing about you or Angie, but it's personal. It was sent to the name of Wainwright. It was sent to him.
And was that message deleted?
Yes.
I want to refer to the line 57673.
Do not want to really use, in quotes, secure texts, end quotes, as I believe nothing is really secure once it's out there.
And to whom was it sent?
To Wainwright.
Mark Siever's cell phone had a number of text messages. To the blind eye would appear to be something that they weren't. But there was parts in the text messages where they became lazy and it almost became a bit of a joke. And that would be eventually what would cause problems for him legally.
Did you see anything in Mr. Siever's phone records when you were reviewing them that came to your attention?
Yes. There appeared to be content in the text messages that showed that he was speaking with Curtis Wright and would suggest that they may be using another device to communicate.
Was there a particular day that raised a flag to you?
Specifically, June 28th and June 29th.
Are those records around the time of the homicide?
Yes.
And where were you looking to get cell phone records around the time of the homicide, June 28th and 29th?
It would be the towers closest to the incident location, closest to the crime scene.
Did you have an opportunity to conduct an investigation specifically into security video at the Walmart on 6 Mile Cypress?
Yes, sir. I was made aware that there was a video the day prior to the murder that we need to go pull.
Was there a specific person or persons on the video that you were looking for within that Walmart?
Yes, there were 2 individuals that arrived in a white car.
And when you pulled the interior video, did you locate the subjects that you were looking for?
Yes, sir. Jimmy Rogers and Curtis Wainwright.
Anytime you find something on a video, it captures a jury. Something that's within the timeline. Seeing Wright and Rogers at the Walmart. Seeing Wright and Rogers walking into Southwest Florida the day of the murder. Anytime we can see something, it carries more impact.
During that investigation, did you have an opportunity to conduct a forensic examination of a Garmin GPS unit?
Yes, I did. I used the forensic software InCase to create what's called a forensic image of the device, which is essentially a copy of all the data on the device.
Eventually, was Mr. Rogers taken into custody in Missouri?
Yes.
And why was he initially taken into custody?
For a federal violation of probation warrant, because we located him on surveillance video footage in Florida. Specifically, it was a Walmart in the city of Fort Myers, Florida. The cell phones from Jimmy Ray Rogers was very useful because Jimmy brought his phone with him. It connected to the GPS in the car at some point through Bluetooth.
The Garmin piece, in my opinion, cracked this case open. We had all these things we were sifting through, and when the Lee County Sheriff's Office were able to crack that Garmin.
It amazes me how much Apple Watches, Fitbits, Garmin watches, all these little trackers that track our steps, I really truly wonder how many crimes have been linked or helped, or how many cases have been helped by having these devices. It's crazy. In this day and age, it's just like, to think you're not going to be caught on camera, to think that you're not, nothing's going to be on you that's going to ping to a tower or something. It's insane. It's truly insane.
And get into all that material. It was a turning point in the case, and that evidence was huge.
Next witness.
At this time, the state calls Myra Simmons.
It was a monster as far as the amount of evidence went. And one of the reasons it was such a monster was because of the amount of cell phone evidence, or cell phone dumps, as we call them.
Since I knew there was communication on the 7th, I looked at the Cellbrite downloads of his text messages to see if there was any communication. And he sent a text to Mr. Wright saying, since neither one of us are likely to carry both with us, whenever you want to use the other one, just text me, other, quote, other, unquote. And then when I can, I will call. So this kind of sparked my interest of maybe trying to communicate on the burner phones. I understood that there was communications on these burner phones on May the 17th, so I looked through Mr. Siever's personal cell at his SMS message, and I found this message that says, to Wainwright's personal cell, hello, brother, from Ann, quote, other, unquote, mother. That was trying to tell me that maybe these burner phones were trying to communicate with each other.
Obviously, the prosecution spent a lot of time with these text messages, and they assert or allege that there was some sort of a secret code going on with these burner phones, these private phones that they had. I have to imagine that was quite persuasive with the jury, that there was some secret conversations going on.
Did you create a map to reflect the tower pings for the 404 number
yes,
on the day of the homicide?
Yes, that's the 404 coming down. And if you see the last one right here is the homicide scene. And that phone shows that 404 pinged there around 11:28 p.m. the night of the homicide.
Even when we narrowed it down to the 3 people we actually arrested in this case, just to go through their cell phone and the cell phone of the victim was an inordinate amount of material, an inordinate amount of time and redaction, because there was so much sensitive material.
Okay, let's go back to page 38.
Mr. Wright is a bad person. He is a killer. We never hid that from the jury. The benefit to the state for using Mr. Wright is he was able to bring context, just like any other witness, to the forensic evidence.
And then on June 30th, you texted him and you said, I just talked to Scott Sievers, right?
Yes.
And you're telling him in the message that you're basically sorry.
Yes.
Scott Sievers didn't have to tell you that Teresa Sievers was dead,
No.
did he?
No.
In fact, you knew that somebody might at some point see these messages, right?
Yes.
That's why on 6/25, Mr. Sievers texts you and says, I will dispose of outdated computer tomorrow after erasing everything from its memory and then remove the hard drive as well. That's a coded message, isn't it?
Yes.
And that's a coded message from Mr. Sievers telling you that he's destroying and getting rid of his burner phone, isn't it?
Yes, the computer would be referring to the phone, and the hard drive would be referring to the SIM card.
Without the Garmin, we never would have been able to tie Curtis Wainwright or Jimmy Ray Rogers to Southwest Florida and to this homicide, period. Without the burner phones, we never would have been able to tie Mark Sievers to this crime. And all the cell tower and technology that goes with it were absolutely critical.
Have you had enough time to talk to your lawyer about whether or not you should testify?
Yes.
Do you need any more time? What would you like to do today, sir?
I can't remember if he testifies or not, but without looking forward on this timeline here, it's really hard to do. I just wanted to say how freaking amazing it must feel to be a prosecutor, a district attorney, a state attorney, and be able to collect that sort of data from that type of device and break a case completely open. I mean, I just know that they must lay their head on their pillow at night just thinking, like, you have to feel amazing. That just has to, I swear, I promise in another life I would have went to law school. I would have done it, guys, I swear. But not this lifetime. Maybe the next.
In the final days of the trial, the facts were becoming more clear. Curtis Wainwright Jr. and Jimmy Ray Rogers killed Dr. Teresa Sievers in a cold and brutal murder allegedly planned by her very own husband, Mark Sievers. Prosecution witnesses would paint a picture of a husband who was mostly concerned that he would become the focus of the criminal investigation. The defense continued to question the credibility of the witnesses and to cast Mark Sievers as a grieving widower. Jimmy Ray Rogers and Curtis Wainwright Jr. were both serving serious time. But what did the future hold for Mark Sievers?
Sir, you do realize that whether or not you testify here today, it's a decision only you can make. Do you understand that, sir?
Yes, sir.
Have you had enough time to talk to your lawyer about whether or not you should testify?
Yes.
Do you need any more time?
No.
What would you like to do today, sir?
I'm not going to testify.
Okay.
But I'd like to go home.
Mark Sievers didn't testify, and I don't think that would have made a difference because there were a couple of times in that courtroom where he shed a tear at a very appropriate moment, and the general reaction to it was he made himself cry. Nobody that knew him in that neighborhood ever said Mark Sievers was an empathetic person.
To be a principal, the defendant does not even have to be present when the crime is committed. That's a powerful instruction. Mr. Sievers is a principal because of that promise to pay. Mr. Sievers is a principal because he provided means for the murder, intelligence information, how to get into the house, what door to use. How did Mr. Wright know that Dr. Sievers would be home alone?
You're going to have to figure out a way of getting Mark Sievers before this jury. Things involving his marriage that were good, his love for his family and his children at the very least, and not said by a third person, but said by him.
The one question you all have to ask yourselves, do you trust Curtis Wainwright? And would you feel different if a polygraph had been administered? Mark Sievers is innocent.
I think most defense lawyers, but specifically myself, you begin to believe, and at some point you feel that you at least have a good puncher's chance of winning.
Mr. Sievers, I've been told we have a verdict. So either side need any time to talk to their sides or their parties because these things are tough and I'm not going to have any outbursts. We'll let the clerk publish the verdict.
State of Florida versus Mark D. Sievers. Verdict.
We, the jury, find as follows as to the defendant in this case. Count 1, first-degree murder. The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. Conspiracy. The defendant is guilty of conspiracy. So say we all, December 4th, 2019, by the foreperson.
When that verdict was read, I didn't feel a sense of jubilation. Teresa Sievers lay in her kitchen floor in a pool of blood because Mark Sievers determined she should die. And it filled me with a sense of melancholy. I thought about the girls, I thought about Teresa Sievers' mother, I thought about her sister. And it was a melancholy that not only had the girls lost their mother, they'd lost their father as well.
Members of the jury, you have found the defendant guilty of 1 count of murder in the first degree. The punishment for this crime is either life imprisonment without the possibility of parole or death. The
death penalty is not easy to get, and we certainly don't seek it in every case. So it was very important to us, first of all, to get the first-degree murder conviction so we could then go forward with the penalty phase of the trial.
We have lost our Teresa, the light of our lives, the star of our family. It has been hard for all of us to go on with our daily lives. The void is unimaginable. She was our strength, our inspiration, and our caretaker. And we will miss her every day for the rest of our lives.
The court's going to have to try to determine whether they feel what's called the mastermind, the person who dreams this up and hires the trigger man, is the worst offender, or is the trigger man who actually wielded the hammer and killed the victim the worst offender.
Although a jury found me guilty, I am innocent of all charges. Our girls have tragically lost their mommy, and now they're about to lose their daddy as well. Therefore, I respectfully ask the court for life.
Killing somebody alone is a terrible thing. But you had your wife murdered. She was murdered brutally. You ruined other people's lives. You ruined your best friend's life.
The jury came back with a recommendation for the death penalty. It's just that, it's a recommendation, but I have to give it great weight, which I will do.
I was surprised. Nowadays, getting a jury to recommend a sentence of death is the exception and not the rule.
What did surprise me is they did not find that this murder was done for pecuniary gain, which was the state's primary theory in the whole case, was that it was done for life insurance policies and money.
Sir, I'm going to go ahead and adjudicate you guilty on each count. On the first count, first-degree murder, it's in order of the court that you be sentenced to death, sir. And the second count, conspiracy, I'm going to sentence you to 30 years in prison consecutive to count 1.
Mr. Rogers and Mr. Wright, who both did the killing, one got life and one got 25 years in prison. The proportionality of why the two actual murderers got less than Mr. Sievers did, I think will be a significant issue for the Florida Supreme Court to hash out down the road.
Justice, sometimes that's as good as it gets. After a case like this, I find that you do hold your loved ones closer and tighter. It's, nothing's promised. The next minute, you may not be here. And it sounds cliche, but I think a lot of cliches exist for a reason, because they're based on fact. And this case definitely made me hold my family very tight.
Shortly after Mark Sievers was sentenced, his lawyers filed a motion for a new trial based on jury misconduct and new information. The new information? A letter from the wife of the man who found Teresa's body, Dr. Mark Petritis, in which she apparently contradicted her husband's testimony. In the letter, Michelle Petritis offered her, quote, unwavering support to Mark Sievers, believed that he was innocent, and offered to take care of the two girls. The letter was found by Mark Sievers' stepmother as she was going through some of Mark's files. Without prolonged deliberation, Judge Bruce Kyle denied the motion. Mark Sievers remains on Florida's death row. I'm Ashley Banfield.
All right, now he's on death row. I just want to see, I always get my information from Wikipedia. I always print it out for you guys, well, for myself, and have it here and highlight all the main points and everything. Let's go ahead and go on Raiford Prison. It's a website. I know I always spell it wrong, I think. Raiford Prison. Yes, I do always spell it wrong. Let's go ahead and search. Oops. Oh, God, famous inmates. All right, we're gonna go and search and see. Offender search. You have to click like search all offenders. You can see I do this quite a bit. Sievers. Mark. I always want to put a C for some reason. Submit request, or we do it up here or something. And then we do inmate population. Yes. Okay, he is there. And here he is. So he is wow. He is in Raiford. I'm pretty sure that Raiford is the only prison with death row in Florida. I'm not sure though. Death row prisons in Florida. Let's just see though. Oh, there's 3. So, okay. So I don't feel so dumb searching. All right. Well, that's all for this one, guys. I will link anything that I find on this case that I think that anybody might want to look deeper. But wow, that was a great video. Court TV does so well with their videos. That's all for this one. We'll see you in the next.
Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share with some friends.